All right, excellent. Now that I've gotten your attention, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the University of California, Irvine. Woohoo! It's so great to see you all here this evening. What an exciting crowd and for an exciting event. My name is Chrissy Collins, and I am so honored to serve as the Dean here at the UC Irvine Division of Continuing Education. I am equally pleased to welcome all of you to this evening's Tearing Down the Pink Wall event presented by WISE, in partnership with the UC Irvine Graduate Division and the Division of Continuing Education, and sponsored by Pacific Life and Simplify. WISE stands for Women Investing in Security and Education, and is focused on educating women and girls from all backgrounds on investing in personal finance, which we are going to learn so much more about this evening. This mission is important to us at UC Irvine for several reasons. But perhaps most importantly for us at the Division of Continuing Education and in our graduate division, we believe that learning never, ever, ever stops. And organizations like WISE play an integral role in our education ecosystem. I'm personally so excited for this evening's panel because I used to be a rather unserious young woman who used her debit card until it stopped working multiple times and signed up for every single store credit card possible. Thank you. Now, as a fully formed adult, almost, although my own financial understanding has somewhat improved, I still have a great deal to learn, and our panel this evening is going to fill in quite a few blanks, I am sure, about investing, financial security, leadership, and most importantly, the general fierceness that it takes to rise to the top of the finance field. This evening, I have the privilege of introducing Angela Daly, the CEO of WISE. Just allow me to read over her incredibly impressive bio. Angela Daly is the pro bono CEO of WISE. She is also managing partner of DAI Partners, a strategic communications firm for the financial services industry. Prior to founding DAI, Angela was a senior vice president and member of the board of directors at Drexel Burnham Lambert, one of the first women to serve on the board of a major financial firm. Angela has spent her career mentoring young women and has served on a number of boards focused on financial literacy and diversity. Angela has 2 sons, both working in finance. Welcome, Angela, to the stage.
Thank you, Chrissy, for those kind words and for your little bit of your background on why we're so important here. So WISE has a long history with UCI. We held our first Pink Wall event here in 2018. And now we're back for our first in-person event since COVID. So thank you, all of the team at UCI. It's been fabulous. So I want to also add my thanks to our wonderful sponsors, Simplify Pacific Life. And I want to ask the leadership of WISE with us tonight, our board members, spouses, and our wonderful ambassadors, just to raise your hand or stand up. Yes. Well, we have a fabulous program presented by a very extraordinary panel. You're going to hear investment advice, investment insights from the best of the best, and then some very fascinating career journeys. Our hope is that some of you will follow into careers in finance and help WISE with its mission. So, a little bit about WISE's origins. In 1997, a small but very determined group of women right here in Orange County to put on an investment conference for women. They had no idea what to expect and were overwhelmed when more than 500 signed up. Wow. They knew they were onto something. So fast forward more than a quarter of a century later, and WISE has pivoted, grown to a national organization, expanded its footprint, but remains true to its original mission of financial education, financial empowerment for females of all ages and all backgrounds. We believe that if you manage your money better, you're going to have more opportunities, more options in life, and very importantly, financial security, peace of mind, and a dignified retirement. So we work through organizations like Girl Scouts and Girls Inc., and universities, UCI, UCLA, Chapman, Berkeley, Fullerton, and our first foray on the East Coast, UMass Amherst. Tonight's event is part of our groundbreaking Tearing Down the Pink Wall series. We gather the best and the brightest to educate us and inspire us to reach our full potential, all under the mantra, she can be what she can see. We have an extraordinary panel of influencers in investments in academia. Jonathan's going to make introductions. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Jonathan Trousseau. Jonathan is a WISE board member and founder of Trousseau Capital Management. He's one of our newest board members, but already he's made an enormous impact on WISE. He's totally committed to our mission of financial education for women, maybe in part because he has 2 young daughters. Are they here yet?
They're coming.
They're coming.
They're
Okay.
getting out of school.
Okay.
I know.
Jonathan is a PhD, and he calls himself a recovering academic, so he's perfect for this role. And he also has a very interesting background, demonstrating in spades that careers don't go in a straight line. Jonathan came to the US from Paris at 18, thinking he was going to have a career in music. And instead, he found himself at UCLA, studying finance, getting a PhD, teaching at some prestigious universities, working at family offices and investments, and finally finding his own firm. So Jonathan is going to do this industry investment portion, then I'm going to take over, get more personal with our panelists, and talk about their careers. We'll take questions at the end. And one little aside, after doing about a dozen of these events or more over the past 6 years, Jonathan is our first male moderator, demonstrating our own commitment to diversity. So Jonathan, showtime.
Oh. See, I'm already breaking the furniture. What a wonderful way to end the week. What a beautiful meeting. Thank you for being here. I do have bio, so bear with me. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the panel today. Our panelists are extraordinarily distinguished. I will start with Judy Posnikoff, who is a managing director at Martlet Asset Management, a private investment firm here in Newport Beach, California, or nearby in Newport Beach, California. We're in Irvine. Prior to Martlet, Judy was a founding partner at PAMCO, where she was involved in all aspects of the firm's investment process, from identifying investment opportunities to working on portfolio construction and risk management to chairing the firm's investment oversight committee. Judy is involved in several industry-related associations, such as 100 Women in Finance, and serves on the board and investment committees of several nonprofit organizations. Judy has 25 years plus of experience in investment management, portfolio construction for institutional investors. And like many of us here tonight, she's also a proud product of the UC school system, having received here a BS, an MBA, and a PhD. Candace Stack, on my side of the room, is a managing director in the Newport Beach office and head of PIMCO's client management group across the Americas. She's also a member of the firm's executive committee. In her previous roles at PIMCO, she managed the U.S. institutional client management team, the U.S. corporate team, the endowment, and foundation team. She also serves as a board member and vice president of the PIMCO Foundation, as a board member of the nonprofit Girls Who Invest. I think we're starting to see a theme focused on increasing gender diversity in investment management industry. Prior to joining PIMCO in 2006, Candace was at Goldman Sachs. She has 22 years of investment experience and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. She's received an undergrad degree in economics from Duke, and she is a CFA charter holder. Candace is another slacker. And Professor Zhang Sun is a professor of finance at the Paul Mirage School of Business. She's a strong advocate of the Mirage School Inclusive Excellence effort. She co-founded and serves as the faculty co-chair of the Mirage School API initiatives. Outside of the business school, she's been actively involved in promoting women in academic finance careers by serving as a mentor, a guest speaker, and event organizer for the Academic Female Finance Committee. Professor Sun has published extensively in the field of investments. Her research focuses on the skills and talents on skills and talents in the asset management industry. Her research has been published in journals such as the Journal of Financial Economics, the Review of Financial Studies, the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis, and the Journal of Monetary Economics. When I tell you as a recovering academic that these are prime journals, take my word for it. They don't get better than those publications. Professor Sun has received a PhD from Stern School of Business in New York, at New York University. She's received a bachelor degree in economics from Peking University and a master's degree in economics from Ohio State University. And now that you know why we should carefully listen to each and every one of our panelists, please welcome me in Sang. I need the microphone. Okay. We're going to start with capital markets. And please make it a conversation. I really do not want to. I know I'm the first male moderator, but I want to keep the moderating to a minimum. When you guys look at the economy, when you look at markets, what types of indicators do you look at to help you approach markets, portfolios, conversations with clients? Where do you see markets today, and what do you think are reasonable assumptions about the future? Candace, do you want to start?
I love the light question. Just roll right off into it. First and foremost, I have to say, I think most of us actually like to think of ourselves as unserious young women most of the time inside. So I actually liked that. Maybe we're still growing out of that. But so capital markets. At PIMCO, most of us, on my side at least, I'm dealing and interacting with clients, typically institutional clients. Those institutional clients have a very long-term mindset. They're not investing for the next week or the next month or the next year. They're really investing over what we think of as a secular period. So a full market cycle, at least 3 to 5 years. So when we look at markets, we tend to look at them through both a cyclical, or what's going to happen the next year, and then also a secular period for the next 3 to 5 years. For myself, I always think of it as the long term. That's the direction you're going. You're headed north, great. And your cyclical is how are you going to get there? Are you going to go by boat, by car, by train, and what speed? So when we think about our own capital market assumptions today, we obviously have a robust, full capital market process. I can go through kind of where we're seeing returns over the 5-year period. But we're really coming into this from a period of historic reset of valuations. And the one that we see is most relevant, probably talking my own book here, but is within fixed income markets. So when we look at the landscape across growth, inflation, market risks, we're looking at a world when we think about high quality diversified portfolio fixed income, probably giving a return somewhere around 6%, even if you just looked at total yield and carry today. And for a lot of institutional investors, that's what they think of from what they need for equities typically. So now you have a much lower volatility, high quality, higher certainty of return, potentially coming from debt markets versus equities. So it's an interesting tension point. Interestingly enough, our capital markets assumptions for equities are basically within 100 basis points over 5 years for fixed income as well. So a little bit maybe of a framework, but long-term view, obviously qualified day in and day out by data that we're digesting. But then thinking about where are we seeing fundamental value? Where do we see that coming from? Obviously earnings yield or fixed income yield, opportunity for market appreciation, and obviously inflation too. So I'm sure my esteemed panelists who are true investors, I engage with clients in much more of an advice perspective, will have a different view. But really a reset of value in fixed income and putting it on par with equities as we look out over the 5-year period.
Sure, I'll go, thank you. I look at a lot of the same things as well, but I also take a just slightly different perspective on a lot of things because our business was hedge funds. And so with hedge funds, you're looking sort of more opportunistically, sometimes very short term, maybe a couple of days to a couple of weeks, to also long term as well. So some of the things I look for are unusual. For example, I'll look to see how crowded restaurants are. I will look to see what subprime lending looks like in the sense that somebody who buys a car, and my sister went down that same route with credit cards, and she had to borrow subprime to buy a car at one point in time. And it was really interesting to see, the sort of payment histories of people and when they start to lag behind and what does that mean for the overall economy. I also look at sometimes weird things. This one isn't original, but I thought it was a clever one. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago about those Halloween skeletons that you see outside of people's houses. They cost $299. Home Depot normally sells out, as soon as they're announced back in the summertime. And there was an analyst that uses that as a measure of consumer sentiment. Do people feel comfortable spending $300 on something that's just going to be for fun? And the economy looks strong because they're still sold out. The last few years they keep selling out and they aren't slowing down. So I look at a lot of those different things and then, try and turn those into sometimes investment ideas. So reaching back a long time ago in the dot-com bust, when Newport Coast was starting to be built, a friend of mine, she and her husband were looking for a new house, and they'd go to all these open houses, and there'd be these great big beautiful brand new houses, and there'd be no furniture. There'd be like a mattress on the floor in the master bedroom, and that was basically it. And it was a sign that the economy in that dot-com boom was sort of starting to turn, in the sense that people had the capability to at least initially buy those houses, but they couldn't afford to furnish them. And so what did that sort of signal for the market coming after that? And talking about furniture, that was the other thing that I found interesting in hindsight, looking at the housing bust, the global financial crisis back in 2008, was that locally, furniture stores were going out of business. It's sort of like every day you'd see in the paper some furniture business that had been around for 50, 60 years locally, had good reputations, they were out of business. And that was a clear sign, again, that there were going to be problems in the market because people didn't have the money to continue buying furniture. Even all those houses were going up and up and up in value. So I look at a lot of different things like that just to get a sense of where things are sort of moving, probably much more on the micro level than what Candace looks at PIMCO, but it's a way of sort of identifying investment opportunities.
That's very cool. I learned a lot. And we have...
Do you have a giant skeleton?
So we have a large asset manager and hedge fund sharing their view, and I'm not an asset manager. I guess I'm going to share from personal investment point of view. So even though in class, right, we teach students a lot about different factors, different signals that predict the stock returns, students often come to me asking, Professor, what stock do you pick? And I will always disappoint them. And I told them that, professors, we are just retail investors with some finance knowledge, right? And we are also strong believers of efficient market. So I used to tell my students a joke. So a professor and a trader go into the walk on the street and they see $20 bill on the street, and the professor will just walk away pretending not seeing it. And the trader will ask, why didn't you pick up the bill? And the professor will say, if it is a real bill, it would have already been picked up by someone else. So that's how finance professors think about the efficient market, right? And from the years of research, we do know some empirical facts. One, compare with institutional investors who have large assets, who have access to private data, private information, who have cheap platform to trade. Retail investors are at a disadvantage. And research also shows that these retail investors, they tend to trade too often. They tend to look at the market too often. And when they trade too often, they tend to be on the loser side. So with these knowledge in mind, I tell myself, okay, I don't have the resource, I don't have the time to always keep an eye on market. Why don't I just be passive? Given the finding that in the public market, at least nowadays, it is pretty efficient. So investing in the passive index could save you a lot of cost. So I try to invest in large index funds to have low cost, right? And I try to diversify. Market is always volatile, right? So invest in different asset classes, different countries, right? But having said that, it doesn't mean that there's no way for active investing. There's no room for that. In fact, that the reason the market nowadays is such efficient is because we have these smart institutional investors that are able to quickly react on those information and to help the information being incorporated into the prices, and they get profit from that. Now, how do we as retail investors get a profit from that? So 2 ways. One is that you learn from them, and to become a skilled manager, like our guest speakers today. I guess today you can learn a lot from Judy and Candace to get advice. 2 is that you can pick a skilled manager to manage money for you, right? So that's actually one of my research field, trying to see what kind of characteristics that can help us to predict which hedge fund going forward I'm more likely to make money for you.
Don't kill me, Jonathan. Can I ask her a follow-up question?
By all means.
Are there certain asset classes where you feel markets are more or less efficient?
Private market right now.
What about within public markets?
Public market is really efficient. So as one study published in 2015, I believe, by one Nobel Prize winner, Eugene Farmer, he looked at mutual fund managers and over 40 years period of time and see whether they generate alpha. And he finds that less than 10% of the mutual fund managers are able to generate alpha. And if you think about the difference between hedge fund and mutual funds, so for hedge funds, we have ample evidence that they do generate alpha. On average, 50% of them have a positive alpha on average. So the question is, why mutual fund versus hedge fund? One big difference is what market do they invest in. Hedge fund, they have a lot of flexibility. They can invest in private market. They have tools. They can do a lot of shorting. They can take leverage. They lock up the investors' money for a certain period of time so they can invest in illiquid assets. But for mutual funds, their hands are tied. So they pretty much invest in public market. And that's where you see the difference. That's why I say the public market is pretty efficient.
And this is where I cry inside, because there's a PIMCO PhD who's actually on staff at UCI. I'm like, I need to make sure that the data on fixed income relative to equities, I got to get that study out there too. Yeah. So I fully agree on the equity component in terms of efficiency in markets. And you've seen that and proven both realized performance as well as incidence of likeliness to perform. But actually in fixed income markets, you do see some structural reasons where the markets are simply less efficient. You have some holders, individuals and organizations and institutional clients, where perhaps for regulatory reasons, for structural reasons, they're non-economic holders, whether they have to adhere to a certain rating. So you actually have a lot of structural inefficiencies in fixed income markets. So fully agree, and this is where you want tension on a panel. Jonathan's loving this.
I love
fully
that.
agree on the ability to hopefully see efficiency in markets, but I think that there's distinct differences between public markets, whether in equities or fixed income.
Actually, I want to follow up on that. There are research on the bond mutual funds. So actually, I would say that the research that I talked about was about equity.
Yes.
Okay, equity mutual fund. I need to clarify that. For bond mutual funds, people have looked at the alpha. On average, they are positive. People have also looked at the persistence of alpha, meaning that if you win today, can you continue to win next year? And the fact is that is also true. So yes, definitely, fixed income market is different market.
So for all the students, I just would like to say the professor is absolutely always right.
But I would add something to that, is that there have been and continue to be unusual opportunities, even in very efficient equity markets. For example, there was a trade that lasted for a long time, and every so often it comes back, which was index rebalancing. So when the Russell 2000 rebalanced, stocks would go out of the index and new stocks would go in. And I had one manager who would go to these great big indexing conferences and basically know how these big pension plans were going to move to rebalance their portfolios to reflect that asset, the index rebalancing. And they would make money on that. And so there are these pockets of opportunity that sometimes last for a while and then disappear. Sometimes they pop back up. But even equity markets can have these pockets of inefficiencies.
And it's really interesting what you just said, Judy, about this, because it really is the way I think, you hear this story, right? Hedge funds are getting in front of the trades and it seems just, wrong, right? But then you actually think about it in a framework where liquidity provision is kind of the game in investing. You want to avoid taking liquidity. Taking liquidity is asking the market for a favor. But when you give liquidity, when someone wants to sell something and you say, yeah, I'll buy it, that's a pretty good place to be. So that's truly fascinating. Let me just add one, and I think what I'm hearing from all three of you is really twofold. Understand the mechanics of investing, number one, and the psychology of investing, number two. But the second dimension is understand who you are. And you're going to be looking at things differently. You're going to have access to different kinds of data, different kinds of opportunity set. I just was reminded of this survey, and every time I hear about it, it makes me laugh and it makes me cry. It's a whole emotional thing. Fidelity has this survey they do, and they've identified something like 100,000 investors in their system that have massively outperformed all the other retail investors, using Fidelity as a brokerage firm. Those top, performing retail investors are the dead ones. They're the ones who haven't traded in 20 years and the accounts have been forgotten. And so that's just part of knowing yourself versus the market. So that's really a great start, thank you. When you think about the big changes, the tectonic changes, geopolitics, and things like public policy and globalization, or maybe friendshoring, how does that come into the picture for you guys?
Well, I would say that it does, because it's something, again, that's out there in the environment that you need to be aware of. But it often doesn't really translate, or at least translate very rapidly, into what's going on in markets. Like one of the things going on right now is the election. And you talk, again, to go back to sort of the local things that I look at, you talk to shopkeepers, you talk to hairdressers and so forth, everything's quiet because people are waiting. They don't really know what's going to happen. They don't know how it's going to affect their taxes and all kinds of other things. But at markets in general, while we still get a little bit of volatility, it's sort of like, that's done. It's over. And so we need to be looking at the next big things coming up. So there are some things that are changing. I think, some of the tax issues, tariff issues, things that will probably come into play in the future will be very important in how it affects free trade. But the sort of movement from the sort of open economies of the world to now shifting sort of back to being more closed, that has huge implications for things. And again, it's not that it happens in a day or a week or even a year, but it's sort of this shift over time that impacts things. And I think just sort of, quite frankly, if people actually physically still read the paper online or physically, just being aware of those big things, I think, is very helpful to investing.
I want to follow up on the politics part, the slow moving. So obviously the election is coming up, but if you look at the trend of investors or even the general public, you see that we started to see increasing political polarization. So meaning that the two parties have sharp, extreme views, very different from each other. I think there's fundamental reasons behind it. Part of it is a bias in psychology called confirmation bias. It's just that when you already form a prior, this is good, and then you're gonna look for information that support your prior. So you're gonna ignore information that is different from your prior. Over time, you look at the news that are supporting your view, and your view gets stronger and stronger. So from the investor side, we do see that the polarization is increasing over time. And not only the retail investors nowadays, even we have seen that pattern showing up now, even for institutional investors who are supposedly to be rational, but their bias is also reflected. And also financial analysts, believe it or not. So if you see the depends on who is on the party and the different political affiliated financial analysts will have different views about the same company. So I think with that said, is when the election is coming up, when people are doing valuations, just be mindful about those biases, right? How does that affect the cross-sectional variation of the stock returns? Because different stocks will have different investor base. They don't all have the same type of, some investors like to invest in certain type of stocks, right? There's a strong political affiliation about the investor base and the type of stocks they hold. So yeah, just be mindful when you are looking at those valuations.
I'll just add on to Judy's closing words in terms of the patience you need to see these come through. And this goes back to kind of our secular process, but the big picture themes we look at very closely, demographics globally, debt levels globally, and the sustainability, therefore, in terms of when investors will actually demand a higher premium paid for a country's stock of debt outstanding, for instance. We look a lot at deglobalization patterns. And then the other big D, sorry, I try to keep these in order, disruption. What are certain models that are getting disrupted right now? The banking system, for instance, is stepping back from certain lending activities that were quite common in practice 5-10 years ago, but due to regulations and their own business model, other private market players are stepping in. And then I'm sure one that we're going to talk through at some point, but technology is another disruptor. So what models are really disrupting the world that we see each day. But for, again, the students in the audience, if you're thinking about the opportunity set in investment management, how cool that you're talking about short and long-term signals from everything from politics to storekeepers to your incredible professor here, who I would love to come sit on a derivatives class at UCI and have the opportunity to listen. But what an opportunity to join an industry where that's the dynamic data sets that you're looking at each day. A lot of D's there.
Yeah, and let's dig into that because, again, and I think of it as kind of mapping career choice to industry plumbing. The plumbing of finance has certain functional necessities. Candace was just talking about activities that banks used to do, and then we tell them don't do them, but the activity still needs to happen. So another player comes in and figures out, well, we're going to be an unregulated player doing the same thing that's always been done. So think of your career path in an environment where there are a few functions that just need to take place, and then we keep reorganizing ourselves in the way we do those. We've talked about public markets versus private markets. Public markets, think of those investments that are kind of traded on the stock market, to keep it simple. Private being the things that aren't. We've talked about alpha and beta. Let me just kind of make a finer point of defining that. Alpha, or let me start with beta. Beta really are kind of think of them as the bulk return drivers that are available to everybody. You can buy US stocks, that would be beta. But then if you're thinking as a hedge fund, you're looking at alpha, ways to generate returns that really aren't correlated with what's available at bulk, at the finance supermarket, if you will. We've talked about passive investing. So given all of that, where do you see, and I'm really thinking within finance now, where do you see the industry moving between asset management, venture capital, investment banking, and I love the point you put on it, Candace, which is which parts have moats and which parts are going to be disrupted, because that presumably would inform career choices.
I'm thinking, was I actually the one who said moats? I was like, if I did, great, okay. So I think for each of you who are thinking about next steps in your career, the market is going through a tremendous amount of change. And I've spoken to individuals in the audience here who are at a startup, which is fantastic. What an incredibly exciting time to be part of the disruption. I do also think that there's strategies and firms that have decades of experience proven through market cycles. And so there's not one right model. There's not one right asset class. And I think it's being patient in how you apply your own skills and join those firms or those opportunity sets. The moats that I think of when you're joining an organization or a firm is, truly, are there other incumbents there where it's so entrenched that even if you come in and you're fantastic, it doesn't matter. Your end investor already has 50 really good options, and it's just hard if you're number 51. So I just look at that, how saturated is the area you're in with really true, strong incumbents. The other area I have is, I think we're in a world now where maybe a few years ago the boutique had such prestige. We're now in a world where you have to be able to invest really heavily in technology, really heavily in terms of being able to manage the regulatory burden that's on asset management firms, really heavily in terms of how do you penetrate distribution in today's day and age. So for me, if I was thinking about next opportunity, and I really want to make sure I was at a place that had the scale that they could invest in those areas. So perhaps boutique versus large-scale manager. Those are just a few things I think about, and I'm sure there's a million other factors. Obviously, the caliber of the individuals that you're working with is number 1, 2, and 3 on anyone's list.
Yeah, I would agree with that, particularly the last part. The ethical approach that people have towards their investors, their employees, and so forth, it has to be top-notch. Just because that's the right thing to do, but also because if it's not, the regulators are going to find you. And the ability to deal with the compliance issues and so forth, it's a huge burden now on entities. Years ago, when people would come to me and it would be the proverbial 2 guys in a Bloomberg wanting to set up a hedge fund, it would be, okay, if you've got good returns and you've got some money under management and you've got 2 years of numbers that are good, people are going to find you and they're going to invest in you, and you can probably grow to if not a giant size, sufficient size to make a lot of money and be very happy. Those days are long gone. You can't even manage $100 million, even $500 million in this space because of that regulatory burden that's put on the individual manager. So the boutiques really do have a hard time, and you see much more consolidation here with a lot of them. And then you also see big platforms. So managers will be part of a trading platform in the investor, and this is on the institutional side, not so much on the retail side. The institutional manager can come through and sort of pick, or a client can come through and pick out which of the underlying managers do they want, and all of the regulatory and compliance issues are handled, and the manager just is doing the investing part. So it's a completely different world from that perspective, and it's really hard because that becomes a very cutthroat approach to investing, in the sense that if your numbers aren't good, you're out. There's no real sense of loyalty there to the underlying manager because they're in some sense a cog in the big wheel of producing returns. So that's very different than what it was, even 5 years ago. It's gotten to the extreme. It probably will swing back a little bit. But I would say to start, I think if you can go to a big, well-respected firm and get into a training program there, or get into something where you're going to learn a lot, that's the best place for you. It's exciting to go to the startups, it's exciting to do this, but the future may only be 6 months at one of these firms before they're out of business, which is unfortunate because they often deliver really good numbers, but they just can't capture the allocations that will keep them at the size that they need to be.
I can speak to this question from an educator point of view. So I was a faculty director of the Master of Finance program of a business school, and I work closely with Deanna Rule, who is sitting in the audience, who is our director for career services. So we constantly talk about what is the market demand of the skills, and how do we design our curriculum, and how do we guide our students to find the career pathways. We oftentimes see the students coming in, they all want to be investment bankers. But then after we help them to analyze their personalities, their interests, then they figure out that the finance world is much broader and their personality may not fit well with investment banking. We design different different curriculums that try to guide them into different career pathways that might suit better them. and we adjust based on market data. So talking about the trend, so one thing we noticed recently is that in the past, usually for the entry-level job, if you want to go to private equity, no way, right? And so you have to first become investment banker and then later join as private equity associates. It doesn't, now the data seem to show that the market is gradually open to fresh master students, even undergrad students, as a financial analyst into private equity. So that's very good opportunity for you guys. And, but bear in mind that the type of skill, they do require financial modeling, soft skill things like that, but still a little bit different between a financial analyst in a big investment bank versus a private equity, where the structure is much more leaner. There's not going to be a whole lot of hand-holding for you. So you need to be independent. You need to make sure that you're a significant contributor to your task, right? So that actually moves a lot of the education into the program. So you cannot afford to learn at your job. You have to learn while you're in the program. So that is one thing that we started to see, and we pivot our program to try to meet the market demand.
Yeah, and again, there's this ongoing tension between the power scale, the power of the incumbent, and disrupting factors. I guess my last question, and we have a few minutes so we can explore it, is going to be a short one. AI, question mark?
Well, for me, it is a question mark. Because a lot of the tools that are in AI, I've seen the quantitative hedge fund managers use for years now. But it's a slightly different approach. I think in terms of sort of the general business of investing in finance, there are a lot of things that AI will sort of take the place of the sort of clerk in the back room, you know, doing Excel spreadsheets and so forth, if people are still doing Excel spreadsheets. But it will take a lot of that away. But I think even so, the reliability and so forth of that is still in question. I think it'll be a few years before we really sort of settle into that. But what remains valuable is the ability to reason, the ability to think about things. You know, thinking about GPT, the ability to ask the right question to get the right answer. You know, that type of thing. That isn't something that you learn necessarily in a math class or a programming class. That comes from sort of a broader range of knowledge that you really need to sort of be able to look at these things and see, is the answer right or is it wrong? And it's very difficult. I'm sure you've heard of junior lawyers using AI to sort of put briefs together for them, and the data's wrong. It makes up, you know, fake cases, incites them. And it's sort of like you've got to have the knowledge to be able to look at that and know, is that right or not? And if a case is cited, go back and check to see if that's an accurate case or not. So there's a lot of room, you know, this idea that AI is going to replace us all and we'll all be on the beach, you know, retired, is not really going to come, or if it does, it's going to be beyond our lifespans. But where we can continue to add value is through that reasoning and the ability to look at things and do they make sense? Am I asking the right question? What do I need to know? So knowledge is incredibly important, even though you can get an answer, you know, as you have been able to with Google, you know, just Google something and get an answer. You still have to be very careful.
I just want to interject because I started my career literally coding, right? I worked for a family office where my job was to develop risk models, and it was coding in MATLAB. Today, basic coding skills are fully commoditized. I can ask my AI assistant to write scripts. What is not commoditized is exactly what you just talked about, having the instinct, having developed the understanding of what the answer should look like, so that when it comes out, you can be a critical thinker around it. I think, forget coding, now it's about debugging, right? And it weirdly is a higher level thinking. Much higher. Sorry, I had to jump.
One of my colleagues
had a great phrase and stuck with me, but he said in some ways it's like being given infinite interns. And that could be, for some of us, you hear that, you're like, that's incredible. And then you think, oh my goodness, the burden of training, checking, ensuring, you're qualifying, you're not dealing with AI hallucination. So I think there's both. I think it's incredibly exciting for the students in the room. I mean, the opportunity you have to become facile with this technology, bring it to the next mile 3 or 4 of your learning from an academic standpoint before you join the workforce. I couldn't imagine a better time. We have spent a lot of time looking at this we've been familiar with this PIMCO for quite some time, but we've been looking a lot at this for our past several secular forums. And I think our own consensus is we're really optimistic on the destination. We think perhaps some are pulling forward how quickly it's going to take for all of this to actually impact many of the firms, processes, kind of time to actually embed this. It could be a little bit longer than people are expecting. But I think it's exciting. I'm trying to force myself to become more fluent with utilizing our own internal version and step by step.
So you guys are doing internal version?
So we've had our own internal large language model for quite some time, and it's built on the chassis of OpenAI. But we have our own named Vera. Yes.
Oh, that's very exciting.
I'm very polite to her.
That's very exciting.
You have to train yourself not to be like, please, would you mind? And I'm like, I can just ask. I can just type into the AI.
But they say it works better if you're nice to it. Right.
Probably. I figure when the computers come get me, maybe they'll be gentle.
They'll be kinder when the robots take over, if you've been kind.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really big question you're asking. I don't think that anybody has a definite answer. AI is gonna definitely fundamentally affect the finance industry, so we see it's really powerful. And I mean, it's good too. One of my students in the capstone project, capstone, by the way, is a summer project that we in the program work with the company to work on a project together. And so the company asked us to find a model to forecast the stock market, and they were using ChatGPT to build a machine learning model. So it's quite neat. 5 years ago, that would belong to probably students in the math department, right, to come up with a machine learning model. So it's really a powerful tool. And some of my students actually talk to me, say, oh, professor, does that mean that this tool is going to replace our job? Right? I told them no. This is actually a great opportunity. So you have this tool, but you also need the finance intuition. And actually, we recently have done some research about how the mutual funds and hedge fund managers are using ChatGPT. And first of all, we find that the hedge funds are very quick adopters of ChatGPT or other large language model in general. So 20% of them adopt within the first couple of months, and they were able to make money on top of that. But the slow adopters, the ones who refuse to recognize the power of the tool, they actually are lagging behind. And that's one thing. And second thing is that the right person using the tool is very important. So we find that not all the people using the tool can make money. Usually it's the manager already skilled. And they already have some AI personnel. And they already have large data. So all these facilities, they can help them to use the tool better. So question is, that actually might raise the question about the disparity about the finance and the industry.
I think that's right. Go ahead.
I think I couldn't agree more, and I think that disparity comes not just with access to data, which again, sometimes you have to have scale to even purchase and have access to large mega blocks of data, but then the ability to actually translate it, translate it, and analyze it. Manipulate it sounded not what I was going for. Strike that from the notes. But analyze it and actually have data become something that provides insights. And so those, I think, are true barriers to entry for the next gen of investors.
I do just have an anecdote that I thought is actually quite interesting. And so it's comparing the adoption of the internet to the adoption of AI, and that with the internet it was very slow. And even as things were starting to get going, there were a lot of people that weren't just slow adopters, that just sort of ignored it. And I still remember working on a research project with a guy who was a PhD. He had worked, in Federal Reserve banks. He had done all of these different things. He said, he goes, I don't see the internet going anywhere. He goes, it's just really not going to do anything. And I sat there and I thought, my sister gets recipes off the internet. If she can do that, what doors are going to open to all of us with that source of information and so forth? So he was completely wrong, but I think there's still that same sort of attitude with AI. There are some people that are saying, nope, no way, I'll never do it. Where we have to sort of be looking at it and sort of trying it out and so forth. I do think protecting your own data, as PIMCO has obviously done, is incredibly important. But it's there, and it's going to be an important part of investing and so forth going forward. And just one other thing that I saw the other day that I thought was really interesting, that NVIDIA's market cap is larger than 5 of the members of the G7. And that's incredible when you think about it. And so that's the other thing that I think we learned from the internet experience, the .com experience, is that the winners that we think are going to be the survivors may not be. Because, the classic example is pets.com. It's gone, but Chewy is there. And that's a huge business that, pets.com should have grown into, but it went by the wayside. And so we don't know who will be the real winners in terms of the providers, the companies, or the stocks, but there's opportunity there, and I think it's important to look at that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? So, we talk a lot about the power of the AI and the positive side. Do you guys see any negative side of AI, potential risk for the investment world?
For sure. I mean, it'll give you incorrect answers on things. You feed it the wrong data, or the analysis is not correct. You don't have somebody that has that intuition looking at that output. And if you're not trading, if you're trading on that without really thinking about it, there can be huge problems.
I mean, it's worse than infinite interns. It's infinite dumb interns, right? I mean, one of the stories that will be a placeholder for this whole era is car dealerships wanted to automate bots. I mean, it's got to be better to talk to a bot than to talk to a used car salesman, right? And so they rolled out all these bots, and then one person went to some Chevrolet dealership, and the first prompt, because it's all about prompt engineering, said, your job today is to sell me a car at a loss. And got like just this incredible deal, right? And so that's out there. And so it's ethical use, it's compliant use, but it's also like, how do you roll these things out without blowing up the shop?
That's why I'm always polite in my prompts.
Well, thank you so much. We'll turn it to the career portion, but thank you so much for this part of it.
You ladies are fantastic. Really, really fantastic. Great insights and covering so much different ground, which was really wonderful. So now I'm going to get a little more personal here, and let's talk about your careers. I'm going to take you on a trip down memory lane. And tell us about when you were in university, what you thought you would be doing, and what turns happened in your career. Judy, let's start with you.
All right, well, there were a lot of turns. When I was an undergraduate, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was very interested in economics, finance, and so forth. And one of the things that I was most familiar with in that space was real estate investing. So I thought maybe I'd be a real estate agent. I worked summers in a real estate office. I worked in a mortgage company once for a summer, learned an incredible amount of things, but that wasn't the career path. When I was finishing up my undergraduate years, my mother had breast cancer, and I had to sort of make a decision there of, do I take a job or do I continue in school? Because there was an MBA program that was available. And what I decided to do was do the MBA program, not because I was really interested in it, and quite frankly, in hindsight, it was not a very, let me rephrase that, it was not a very highly regarded program, although I got a lot out of it, but it was the right choice because it gave me flexibility. And so that really helped a lot. And then as I was finishing that, I did well in the finance classes, The professors liked me, so they were very encouraging, and there was a PhD program that was starting up, and they had 3 slots, and 1 slot dealt with financial economics, so I did that. And I expected to be an academic. And quite frankly, my career goal was to go to work at one of the Cal States, because I thought that would be perfect. You know, it wouldn't be as pressured as the UC system or some of the private schools, but it would still have the interaction with the students, which I really enjoyed, and I would do that. Well, I ended up not doing that. I ended up, of all things, doing a postdoc in salinity and drainage issues in the Central Valley of California. And that was one of those weird twists that as I was in the PhD program, I was a teaching assistant for the environmental economics classes because I had taken that class as an undergraduate, and the professor remembered me. And then we had, I think in that department, they had 3 environmental economics professors, and 2 of them left at the same time. One retired, one went to another university. And the one guy that was left, I had also TA'd for him, he said, I gotta have somebody come in and help teach these classes. I will finance a postdoc for you if you will teach these undergraduate classes in environmental economics. And it was sort of like, oh, do I move to Florida for this job, or do I stay in California and do this, which was something that I was actually quite interested in. So it was a good experience, but it took me off that path. And I thought the way to get back was to start teaching at one of the Cal State schools, and I did that for a semester, and quite frankly, hated it. And I hated it not because of the students, not because of the teaching, not because of even the research that I was doing, because I was doing research projects. I just didn't like it. It was a very different environment, and quite frankly, as a woman, it was a very different environment than what I was used to at the UC system. Because there, it was sort of like, yeah, you're a girl, but you know, you're a girl. Who cares? There, it was really different, and I look at it from the sense that there was really no interaction with all of the faculty, whereas before, I knew everybody. We went to dinner after the, the colloquiums every week and all of that. I didn't have that, and I really missed it. But at the same time, somebody that I had started the PhD program with had gone to UCI, and he had gotten a job in his last couple of years teaching somebody to do finance that was a math PhD. And the firm that had hired him to do that hired him then full-time to be their director of research. And he said, and this was doing investing in hedge funds. And he said, I am just swamped. He goes, it's a mix of client education, research, and then looking at managers. He says, can you come down and help me? And so I had one day a week that I wasn't teaching, and I went down and helped. And it was here at Fashion Island at Newport Center. We were right above PIMCO's trading floor, which was interesting, to look in hindsight at that. But I loved it. It was just perfect because it incorporated the teaching, incorporated research projects that had a beginning and end, not something that extended for 5 years or more. And it was an area that I looked at from the perspective, I've always been taught that markets are efficient. They're not, and particularly at that time, they really weren't. There were lots of pockets of inefficiencies that people were able to take advantage of. And I ended up looking at quantitative hedge funds. And that was fascinating because at the time in the hedge fund space, now when you think of a hedge fund manager, you think of George Clooney in an Italian suit, no tie. That was not the case 25 years ago. The hedge fund guys were the guys who didn't fit in anywhere. They didn't even fit in at Bear Stearns, which was the last place that people went when they didn't fit in at Goldman Sachs and so forth. And I say guys because they were all guys. And that really hasn't changed. It has changed a little bit, but not much. But I ended up doing that, and it was just so fascinating to learn something new. Some people would come up to me and say, I have a Sharp of 5. You really should give me money. And it would be like, you have a Sharp of 5? That's impossible. Let me find out why you have a Sharp of 5 or why you think you have a Sharp of 5 because it's just wrong. Rather than, okay, I'll give you money, which quite frankly for a lot of our competitors, that was the incentive. I'm gonna give them money because they must be good. Rather than, no, they're not good. There's some problem here somewhere. And so that was really valuable to have that education behind me to be able to look at that. But it was a very convoluted path. And we ended up setting up our own firm almost 25 years ago, back in 2000. And I will say, I always think it's better to be lucky than to be good. We were very good, but we were also very, very lucky. We caught the wave of setting up just when the NASDAQ reached its peak. and then things fell off the cliff, and institutional investors needed somewhere to go, and they were looking at hedge funds. So we were set up just exactly the right way when that wall of money came out, and so we did really, really well because we were institutional. We didn't sell, private wealth products and so forth, which is where a lot of our competitors came from. And now the industry has turned a lot because now private wealth is a huge part of the business. And it's where a lot of firms have really moved into because that's where they see a lot of opportunities in terms of generating new clients and fees.
Well,
So very,
twist and turn.
I know.
More than I knew.
Right.
Who wants to go next?
I can talk, yeah, it's quite a journey. Yeah, mine is much it's simple. I had my undergrad in economics and then move on to master economics, and then I was in the statistics department for PhD for 1 year, and then move on to finance PhD, and then become a professor at UCI, all the way till here, so almost 20 years now. So yeah, very simple, I still had no idea when I was in the undergrad program I will be a professor, because I thought that is going to be a very, very much talking job, and I was introvert. I never can think about myself going up in front of a big crowd and do the public speaking. But one thing I didn't know is that I like research. I actually interned in some banks, and I didn't like being a teller and things like that, doing daily operation. And but I like all the theories that I learned from my undergrad classes. I like looking at the data and figure out new things. So those are the things that make me think that at least I can be a researcher. So whether or not become professor, that's a different question. So I ended up enrolling in a PhD program, at first in statistics because I was good with math. And then I took a class in the business school by a professor in finance, who ended up becoming my advisor. And I was fascinated because he was teaching financial econometrics and teaches how can you apply the statistical method to analyze finance data and come up with good intuition and good findings. I think that's a great way to have some impact to the market, because now I can learn something that nobody else know, and I can tell maybe investors, I can tell the regulators what I find. So that's how I changed my major into PhD in finance. And even after I graduated from, actually on the last year, towards the end of my graduate study, I had the opportunity to join as a hedge fund manager. At that time, I also had an offer from UCI. I was debating, and then people said, you can first try the professor job. If you don't like it, you can go to the industry. But usually it's a one-way ticket. I don't know why, but at least at that time when I was a student, it was like that way. So yeah, I came here, didn't think that I will stay here forever. So I'll just say, I'll try a couple of years. Maybe I will move on to the industry later on. But once I come here, I find that I really like working with the students, to my surprise. Yeah. So yeah, I like helping them out. So helping out them finding jobs, and maybe they sometimes tell me, this is something that I learned from your class, and later I use it for my job. I feel it's very fulfilling thing.
I don't think
yeah.
that sounds so straight to me. You didn't know when you found something else you liked, and then eventually there were a lot of steps in between there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think so?
Not so straight.
Oh, okay. I think it's relatively straightforward.
Within the same field. Okay, I'll go with that. Candace, how about you?
It's relatively straightforward when you are PhD teaching derivatives. It's amazing. It's so incredible. So no, I'll keep mine really short and simple. And I think I'll just riff off of two things that I heard from my esteemed panelists. It's important to find something early on that you authentically have curiosity about. So I think each of them had something in their early academic career that they genuinely enjoyed. For me, I genuinely enjoyed economics in undergrad. And then I also heard a few examples of things that you didn't like to do. And so I think as important as it is to follow opportunities and what you want to pursue, your entire career as a student, as you're job searching, you're also going to find things that you're like, this doesn't excite me. I don't want to do it. And listen to the no's as much as you do the yeses. So I had I'll keep it super simple. Econ, I've worked in investment management my entire life, career, I shouldn't say, it feels like the life sometimes. And it's been an incredibly dynamic, always changing, and I think it's so neat for those of us who are, you pick up the paper, you see something that you're reading about, and you actually see it embedded in markets a day, a week, a month, a year later, and I just find that really compelling. So my academic career and then my professional career has all been investment management, and for me it's been really fulfilling, to borrow professor's words, to work with institutional clients, recognizing who they serve, their mission, and really serving as a safety net for a myriad of different institutional organizations.
So there's a lot of talk these days about mentorship, sponsorship. So I'd like to know from you ladies, how important have mentors been, and I'm going to use those interchangeably, I know they're different, but how important have they been? And if you could share who's been the most important and what you learned.
I can start first. Mentorship is super important for me. First, when I was in the PhD program, I was the only female student in my entire school. Not entire school, in my entire finance department. And in the finance department, NYU is a big one, and they have over 60 full-time faculty, but only two of them are female faculties. So I feel I'm kind of like a strange, weird person, and I see myself becoming a successful finance professor or even career in finance. But later when I joined UCI, I was so lucky to have a mentor who is a senior female in my area. And before I joined, she was the only female, by the way. And then so I learned so much from her, and we become great friends. We share a lot of things. Sometimes it's not about research, sometimes about family, right? Just, I feel the support, because in the field, finance academics can be very competitive. And actually, we have this tenure clock that is clicking, and if by the time that your tenure clock is reached that you didn't publish enough paper, I'm sorry, your job is done, right? And you have to find another job. So it's very stressful. And the publication is very uncertain, very long. One of my papers, it took me 8 years to publish it. And the tenure clock is only 8 years, right? At maximum. So yeah, so I just a lot of pressure at that time. And I had to talk to my mentor, which is all my friends, and I sometimes just vent to her. And yeah, she shared with me the tips about how can publish well, and also she will introduce me to different opportunities. Sometimes I serve as a discussant in a conference to get my recognition, right, reputation out. And she will invite me to serve as a program committee members. She will look at my paper and give me advice how to improve the paper. Throughout the time, I was so benefit from my mentor.
I'll give a slightly different angle on mentorship. I do feel that so often you're taught to focus on find a senior mentor, find an executive sponsor, and with reflection over at least my career, I found that my peer mentors or my peer sponsors, those I've grown up in the organization with, are those who are most prone to give you true, honest, open feedback. If you ask someone really senior, how'd I do? They don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to say anything. They're going to say, great, you were awesome, right? And you're true, somebody who you're in the trenches with, or perhaps you have a lot of similarities in your role and function in day to day. They're actually going to say, here's 3 things you could have done more of. Here's something that maybe you should have left off. They'll give you a true, authentic coaching, and over time that compounds. And so if you stay within industry or stay within an organization for not just a year but decades, it's those peer sponsors who are going to be the most influential of them. The ones who are most loyal to. I have a peer sponsor here who said, "Hey, you've got to do this, can't." I was like, "Absolutely, whatever you need." So it's the people who are going to say, I need you, I need help, and it's going to be the individuals you grew up in the organization with.
Candace, was that a mix of male and female?
Yes.
Judy?
So I would say yes, both mentorship and sponsorship is incredibly important and incredibly valuable. And I would say sort of the obvious ones are my advisor in graduate school and my thesis advisor, and then the guy that I did the postdoc with. I mean, he was just incredible. Unfortunately, both of them died fairly recently, and I didn't get a chance to tell them how nice they were to me. But Jane Buchan is incredible. So she's on the board of WISE, and we've been partners since 2000, and we worked together since 1997. But she helps everybody. It's amazing to watch her. And she's, of course, helped me in incredible ways, opening opportunities, saying, yes, you can do that, don't worry about it. And one of the things, when we set up PAMCO, we sort of divided the world and responsibilities up. And I ended up taking responsibility for clients in Asia. At that time, it was Japan and Australia. Well, I wanted to go to Australia, but I was kind of really hesitant about going to Japan. She said, no, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And I was fine, because I knew I always had her to ask questions of, to get help. Even though she has only transited through Japan, she was really valuable in giving me a lot of advice on how to deal with clients and prospects there and investment managers and so forth. But I see her do that with a lot of other people, and I think the value of people who are willing to sort of go out of their way to just help somebody answer a question. Did you do a good job? She'll always tell you yes, but then she'll sort of say, well, you might have, done this a little bit differently. But it's incredibly important and incredibly valuable to have people like that.
Jane is absolutely amazing. I mean, she'll talk to help anyone. She's a woman without an agenda, just there to help. So, but I want to do one follow-up here, because I have heard people talk, how do you find a mentor? Is it purposeful? In other words, do people get matched? This is happening now in corporations, right? They match people with potential mentors, or it happens organically. What advice can you give the students here starting a career, or anybody? How do you identify a mentor? And does it have to be formal, or could it just be, I mean, from my own experience, I just found a couple of men that I really respected, very senior in the organization, watched what they did and emulated them. Yes. So how do you guys feel about, how do you actually identify a mentor?
Be respectful of their time, keep it simple, and I think don't force it.
Yeah.
So I think the whole structured matching formal programs, I think that's well intended. I think they rarely work.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment?
I think it's a combination of both organic and structured. So I find my mentor in my department is organic because we work together. We also happen to have common research interest. Mm-hmm. But I have some other mentors in other universities that I got to know through inviting them to come to talk at our university because I admire their research. And I got to know them through that way. And later on, when I served as a mentor for AFACT, which is the Academic Female Finance Committee, I find that that is a structured organization that help you to find mentors. So we have conferences, we have breakfast, dinner, social events, and all these mentors are open to all the people, and they just approach us. So that's a structured way.
Yeah, structured way.
Yeah.
I think the structure can be good, but I think you still have to, there has to be some sort of spark between the people involved, because otherwise it's very formulaic.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, my thesis advisor, that's obvious, somebody that should mentor you. It often doesn't happen though, because there isn't that spark and that sort of mutual interest and so forth that sort of helps you through. So I think, there is structure, but I think the informal is actually incredibly valuable if you can find it.
Yes, that simpatico that you see with someone, you get along well. Yeah. Listen, we are really running out of time here. I have a bunch more questions, but I am going to go to one that's another thing about not a straight line. We all face challenges in our career, setbacks. So can you share a setback and how you recovered from it, how you dealt with it, and very importantly, what did you learn? Candace, you want to talk to that?
So I think everyone here has their own life story, their own path, and I think having the empathy and compassion of knowing that the individual next to you probably is managing something or has managed something that's been challenging. I lost both my parents earlier in my career, so I was kind of starting off in my early 20s, trying to figure it out. And it was a challenging time, but I look back and I figured, I actually, in some ways, look at it and think it gave you motivation. It gave you a sense of, I have to figure this out, because you're kind of, you have to, yeah. And in some ways, I think it's been quite formative to my career.
So setbacks can be good, and you learn from them, yes. Or challenge.
Formative.
Yeah. How about you? Yeah.
Setback. Academic journey is quite uncertain, and I talked about the tenure clock. And at my career, there was one point that I'm on the verge of being rejected by the university. I have the feeling, right? And at that time, I get support from my families. I get support from my colleagues and mentors. But then also, I think strongly, I have a belief that I have value, I have skill. And even if this university does not recognize it, I will have a market that get me job. So yeah, that keep me poised.
Yeah, keep you motivated. Yes,
Yeah.
keep going. Perseverance.
Yeah, God just believe you in yourself.
Yes, yes. How about you, Judy? Anything to share here?
What I've noticed, this is a more general statement, is that failure is actually very helpful for a lot of people. Because if you go through, you start a business, start a fund, whatever, and it fails, what you learn from that, or what you can learn, not everybody does, which is a problem, but what you can learn from that really can set you up for success at the next time. And that's incredibly important. And if you look at a lot of the big entrepreneurs, they've had multiple failures. You look at a lot of the big investors, they've had multiple bad years, even strings of bad years. But you learn from it, and then you don't make the same errors if you had made errors, again, and you really often come out stronger from that.
I think that is a great point. Don't be afraid of failure. These things happen. Just pick yourself up and get going again. So I have, I have so many questions here. But let me see. This is about the pink wall. And we know that in a pink wall in finance, especially, finance is dominated. We've heard this from several of our wonderful panelists about dominated by men. So the question is here, why have the numbers in terms of women in leadership in finance stayed so dismally low and don't seem to budge? Judy, you've been involved in this you had a long career here. Why do you think that these numbers are probably the same as when you started?
Yes, actually, that's the amazing thing, that the numbers don't actually change. No matter what the things that have, girls who invest, I was on the board of 100 Women in Finance. We spent a lot of time on creating opportunities for young women to enter the field via internships, training, all kinds of things like that. And what I found really interesting is that the numbers now for the entrance to the industry are at par with men, with boys. Yeah. But the path is not the same. And what we also saw at PAMCO in particular was that we would lose really promising women when they were sort of in their early 30s. They got married and maybe they moved with their spouse, they had children. Whatever we put in place for a lot of them, it just wasn't enough, and we would lose them, and it was so unfortunate. The other thing that was really interesting too is coming to Orange County is not like going to New York for a job. There is no real big social network for late 20s here in Orange County. And we had problems, somebody would come in, from the East Coast and so forth, and they couldn't form a social network. Having grown up here, I already had that, so I didn't have to worry about it. And we would lose them because they would go back to New York. They would do something like that because they didn't have that social network. So we tried to do whatever we could. We modeled maternity and paternity leave after the UC system, that you can step out for a year and then get back on the thing. That still didn't really help. It helped in some cases, but not. Broadly, what I see is there's a dropout, but women don't come back. And that's where we have the big hole. And so I think in terms of, my personal opinion is, instead of continuing the big focus on getting women into the pipeline, let's see where they get out and what we can do to bring them back. Because the industry changes so much that if you're out for 5 years, you lose sense of what the new products are, what the new regulations are, what all of these things are, and it's really hard to get back if you don't have that. So what can we do? There have been a number of big firms that have set up sort of re-entry internships, kind of, that I think are helpful, but they're still not enough to really move the needle, and I think that's where we need to go. And just one other thing that I've noticed too, to really get to the top, you've got to have, in a lot of large organizations, international experience, and you've got to have P&L experience. And that's where a lot of women step back. They're offered a job where they have real dollars and cents tied to their name, P&L experience, running a division, running something, and they don't take it. And that's where I think they sort of get off the path. They may continue to proceed through the company, but they're not going to be CEO.
This is a great question. I think that the academic have paid some attention about the financial analyst, their career tracks. And first of all, finance industry is an industry about information. So you have to be out there and talk to people, collect the information. So that sometimes, being a woman, you have a lot of other obligations that prevent you from participating the after work coffee hours, things like that. Sometimes there are clubs that are kind of exclusive, right, to boys, right? So then you don't get access to those information. So that's a structural barrier. And some others are kind of like, I think, personality, where just by nature, sometimes women are more, don't like to argue, don't like to fight for opportunities, and they are satisfied with not doing much social. I think that's some research showing that. So there is some characteristic difference.
That pulls them back.
Yeah, pull them back. Yeah, so they're fine. If they don't get promoted, they don't argue. But men tend to fight for opportunities. So there's some research showing that. So I think it's a combination of many factors.
Candace, anything you want to add to this? You're at a big company.
No, I'm actually way more optimistic. I think that the pipeline is incredible. We're seeing from the talent come in. I think there's incredible programs now in terms of attracting, retaining, developing women. I think we're seeing it come through, not just within companies, but within the investment allocator community. So I actually have a much more hopeful, both view.
So you think things may change in the next decade?
I think they already are, and
Yes.
I think that it's well underway.
That's wonderful.
I want to add one thing that is also positive. So this, even though we find that female financial analysts tend to social less, but when they do social in a right environment, they actually perform better.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, listen, I wish we had discussed this longer. I have other questions I would love to ask, but it's time to open it up to the audience. We want to hear from you. What would you like to pursue, either on the market side, investment side, or on the career side? Yes.
I wanted to ask more about what suggestions you guys would have for someone who doesn't have an education, this type of finance-related degrees, and how they can enter in. Thank you. And how they can enter the market, or the necessity skills that they need to learn.
I would put a great plug-in for the CFA program, and that's a multi-step charter holder program, but you can enroll in it, study, be accredited, and it'll instantly show when you're interviewing or engaging your commitment to building the skill set. And if you complete the program, I think it's a really helpful signifier. The CAIA is another one, CAIA. But those are just two that jump out, which I think would be fantastic. And you can pursue it prior to a job. You can't receive, for some of them, you won't be able to receive a full charter holder until you're employed for a few years. I haven't followed exactly the rules these days. It's been a while. But certain programs like that I think would be fantastic. But I'm sure you have.
So why not getting an education? So for example, the Master of Finance program at UCI is 1 year, right? Very intensive. And we have scholarship. So it's a good opportunity to actually get a formal education.
I would agree with both of them. I think perseverance there is also important, that to the extent that you can get into say, a large firm, you may be able to move around there, sort of from an entry level, and it may not be in the area that you want to be. You may be in operations or some sort of admin support, but there are often opportunities to move forward.
Okay, my question is to the professor. One of the market's function is price discovery, and you mentioned passive investing. But don't you need active investors for passive investing to succeed? And the other, just to extend that, you mentioned something about diversification, but like we saw in 2008 and even 2022, when the equity market is going down, all the asset class, the correlation is like close to 1. So when you really want the diversification to work, at that time it doesn't seem to work. So is diversification really that necessary?
Those are great questions. So we recently actually read a paper about the limit of diversification, and that talks about passive investment. And we used to say, just spread out your money in the index and you'll be fine. But we find that we do need active managers to supply liquidity. Otherwise, these demand by passive investors just simply gonna push up the price among all the assets that they buy. So that creates a lot of extra correlation among the stocks, and that increase the volatility about the aggregate market. So that lose the benefit of diversification. So I think that's a big research question right now. We don't know what is the limit of diversification.
But just on that question, we're all big fans of behavioral finance here. You're also exhibiting extreme recency bias, right? You're taking the most, one exception that was truly historic in nature and forecasting it as you go forward. So we all look at 2022, and absolutely diversification didn't deliver in the way you would expect. I think starting valuations matter, but I think it's really dangerous if we take that and then apply it to go forward scenarios where you have a completely different starting point from valuations and potential correlations.
Yeah. Do you guys think that within equity markets, some inefficiencies do exist based on market size? So if you're looking at larger companies versus smaller, just curious on your thoughts on that.
We can talk about economy of scale, and that's a question. Right now, for the equity market, if we look at equity mutual funds, there's evidence of a decreasing economy of scale, meaning that when the funds get larger, it's harder for them to find profit opportunities because of their price impact. So they have to spread out, and that dilute their investment returns. But recently I had a PhD student doing research on ETFs. So we used to think that ETF and passive funds are the same thing, but he actually find the opposite. He find it increasing economy of scale, which is, I think, quite interesting. I don't know about the bond market. I think in the bond market probably is increasing economy of scale. The larger the fund managers, the more advantage they have, because they have bargaining power in this over-the-counter market. So they get better deals, right?
It would be execution, data, being able to take down large swaths of risk. So all those things.
Hi, thank you for sharing your insight. I have a question. What's your suggestion for individual investor for their retirement account? Because I was told when I first started by some professor at the business school said the best thing you do is just buy the market, buy the ETF. Or I was lazy, I bought a lot of targeted retirement fund. And now I'm with Fidelity, and they keep telling me they can do better for me if I gave my money to their management account, which they charge about 0.8% to manage the fee. From what you said, it's like most of the managers, fund managers, didn't do any better than the market. So why would I want to pay them 1% to manage my money? They keep saying, oh, we will diversify. We will make sure we protect you in the down market so you don't lose a lot, blah, blah, blah. So I mean, like, how do you compare a retirement 2040 offered by Fidelity or Freedom 2040 offered by UC through Fidelity, and their managed account. I mean, they just keep talking. Like I talked to 3 advisors there. They keep wanting me to move my money from other place to their management account. So I don't know whether that makes sense or not.
I mean, that makes sense from their point of view. Then I haven't looked at in detail. You have to look at in detail what kind of assets they are investing. So 1% sounds like a hedge fund level of fees. Nowadays, if you invest in index funds.
I think that's their fee on top of the investment fees.
So that's okay. That's really high fee. So then Fidelity now is going to private market, believe or not. So that could be one way for you if their managers can give you access to what traditionally hedge fund investor can get access to, then they can offer you higher return, and then there's no problem. But if all they do are just invest in public stock market, then I will be quite suspicious. How come they can generate such a, they're asking for such a high fee?
They said their fee, they will waive the other management fee. So they charge you up 1% upfront, but they will waive you the fee you pay to the.
Oh, so it's a load fee front.
Because they were also buying, I don't know.
It's a load fee, yeah. That one is, I'm surprised that it's getting back because the load fee used to be popular. For some time, it's getting not that popular. So usually, they don't charge you anything going in, and then they charge you annual management fee. So it's interesting that they are getting back. Part of it could be psychological reason. Yeah, so people tend to ignore the fee that they pay just one time, and they pay more attention to the fees that they constantly are paying.
This is 1% every year.
Oh, is it? That is management fee. 1% is quite high.
I have a question. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your expertise. Very fascinating. I have a question related to alternative investments. We keep hearing more and more about that out in the classroom, outside of the classroom, from other events. So really curious, and you mentioned Kaya, which is, I'm hearing a lot about that in terms of being a real interest. In institutional investments, do you see that you're looking at alternative investments as an actual asset class, or are you assigning a certain percentage of the portfolio to that? Are you making that kind of commitment? What are you seeing? And then do you think that it might open up potential roles later down the road?
So for our institutional allocators, they were some of the first movers there, and certainly if you look at the way, even take a large endowment, you know, how their asset allocation looked a decade ago relative to today, a much higher allocation to alternative investments. And I think we have to really unpack what that definition is, because it includes private equity, venture, private credit, it can include real estate, infrastructure, it can include quantitative diversifying strategies. So every investor is going to have a different definition. I think that you are seeing perhaps an evolution in that market where everybody should just make sure, am I getting compensated as the investor, to our professor's point, not as the manager, but as the investor for the liquidity that you're giving up? And I think that's a fair question. We typically would say that should be around 200 basis points from a private debt versus public debt. I absolutely think it's creating job opportunities. I think there's complexity. There's deal-by-deal teams. There's a level of demand that's going to be sustained there for quite some time. So I think from a job formation and job opportunity set, that is a super secular trend and will continue. And I do think that the entire market and industry is trying to figure out how to bring more of this to retail in an appropriate and responsible way, both by vehicle as well as by education. But I would be of the lens of, for secular opportunity, yes. Can I tell you right now, is it going to be venture versus real estate? No idea.
Okay. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you so much for all your insights and anecdotes. Thank you. So yeah, thank you so much for all your insights and anecdotes. I wanted to more address the pink wall And I wanted to ask if any of you panelists have experienced imposter syndrome of any some sort, and how do you ground yourself in your strengths?
That's an interesting question. I think that, I'll speak broadly, I think women in general feel the imposter syndrome in a number of different areas. I think if you do, so just to take my experience, so one of the things that has really helped me, and it was one of the questions that we sort of reviewed with Angela ahead of time, was, does your education matter? Did it have a real impact? And for me, having a PhD made a huge difference. And it gave me credibility where somebody looking at me, particularly 25 years ago, I didn't have that. But I had the PhD, and so I was more on a level playing field with a lot of the managers that I spoke to and a lot of the clients that I spoke to. And so that helped immeasurably. I don't know whether it gave me more self-confidence or it just sort of lessened their view they improved their view of me because of that. But I never really had problems in that space, imposter syndrome. I think, though, that I was very lucky, and I do think that a lot of people do, but I think it's where it's a more competitive landscape, whereas I was sort of in a very much niche area, and so I didn't see that as much.
I don't have it, I don't reflect having too much of an issue, but I have a daughter, and I think she has something like that. When she did something great, she will say, "No, I'm not that good," right? So it's just by luck, something like that. Yeah, I think I just give her more encouragement and let her be success multiple times. If one time is luck, 2 times is skill. That's what finance people say. So yeah, that's how we can help her to establish confidence. And I think also mentors can be important in that respect because they can tell you from their eyes how good you are, right? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your stories. I moved to US just 3 months before, and then I'm pursuing my career in US, and all your stories are quite a big motivation for me. And then I believe in that tearing down the pink wall should be done by myself, by everyone. So I also want to contribute myself to help others. So I want to ask you about, is there any activities or experience from your side that you helped someone to tearing down the pink wall, and then how did you do to keep these kinds of things going, and how did you change your culture maybe in your workplace? Yeah, these kinds of experience I would like to ask.
How many female faculty are there now?
Good question. Actually, UCI has the largest percentage of female faculty. We are very proud of that. Yeah, we also, I think not just tearing down the pink wall, I think just being in generally more involved with anything that you think you can contribute. So for example, you're international, right? I was international coming to this country, so I know there's a lot of barrier to get adjusted. So that's one of the reasons why I founded this API initiative. So we want to create a friendly environment for also a lot of international students who happen to be Asian, right? So right now we are looking for ambassadors, student ambassadors. So yeah.
I think you just volunteered.
Right, yeah. So you can talk to me. There will be a lot of exciting networking opportunities.
All right, thank you all for being here, not just sharing your personal stories, but also sharing your expertise. I'm curious, for those of us that work with students, or for the students in the audience that might be first gen or low income, and they haven't started building the wealth yet, what are some steps they can take now to build that wealth going forward, and how do they set themselves up for success? Kind of like that, where's the starting point?
The discipline of saving, I think, cannot start at too young an age, and I think that means trade-offs, recognizing if you're spending, that's $1 you could have saved, and the power of that dollar right now, what you're compounding it at, is extraordinary. If it was 2 years ago, I probably would have been like, go spend it. You're not really earning anything when you save it. Right now, save the dollar. So I think the discipline of saving, have forced saving, overcome the behavioral, obstacles there, but literally structure it so that it's out of your paycheck, that it's embedded in your budget. So forced saving, budgeting, if there's something from a spend standpoint that you absolutely have, are working for, I think have it there, but have the discipline. But that would be my very first thing to say.
We did a project with Girl Scouts for a couple of years, and what we did was sort of the trade-off idea. And so it was the apartment. Do you have a little studio when you're just starting out, or do you have this big glamorous apartment? And then the costs of each of them. And I recently heard that a group had done a really clever thing. What is the cost of having a dog? And for a 12-year-old, everybody wants a dog, but it's really expensive. And kids don't realize that, and I don't think 20-year-olds recognize that either. And so that's a real life sort of approach to thinking about those issues of trade-offs. Do I want this or do I want that? But if I want this, what do I have to give up? And how much is it going to cost me? But I think the forced savings is incredibly important.
I have to say, sorry, I wasn't going to add a personal anecdote, but one of my proudest moments as a mother was recently I saw a screenshot from my father-in-law, so my daughter's grandfather, and it was a thank you note she wrote for $20 he sent her for her birthday. And she said, "Grampy, I'm putting in my bank account because compound interest." And I was like, it's sinking through. It's working.
That's
All
the
those
ripple
dinner time
effect.
Conversations.
Yeah.
So I was so happy to read that. But he was kind enough to take a picture and text it to me. So
Yeah.
so it was snail mail from her to him, text back to me. I was like, there you go.
It's beautiful.
You're going to put a plug in. Outside, you're going to see cards that say 25 tips for wealth building. WISE put together this little pamphlet. All of our board members did a very short, concise ideas on how to build wealth. So take a look. Just go to our website, but there's a card out there with the QR code. Yeah.
It's like you do a high yield savings account, mutual funds,
Yeah,
and all that, but
and
even
even
forced
more,
savings.
these tips on diversification, Social Security. Not that anybody here is corporate, you can't start too early thinking about it. So take a look. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Stephanie. I'm currently a grad student studying Masters of Business Analytics, and I just want to take time to say thank you for being here and sharing your insights and your inspiring and hearing your backgrounds. It's very inspiring. And I have 2 questions. My first question is, how do you see data analytics shaping the future of financial services? And my second question, how do you see with students or masters, how important is having data analytics, or at least knowing a little background of it as a skill can be important in leveraging the industry, and particularly, especially for females as well?
Data analytics is very important, high demand job, but there are also a lot of supply of labor in data analytics, and how do you stand out, right? I think that not only you need to analyze data well, but also be able to come up with a good story and explain in layman language to your boss. So not just the data part, but also the finance or any other industry expertise, combining them.
Thank you so much.
Hi, so I'm Ari. I'm from the Master of Finance program, and thank you for coming here today. It was really helpful. I learned a lot, and I just want to ask you one question. Is you said in some scenarios women can network better than men. So I just want to ask, from what you have seen or experienced, what aspect of networking that you think women did better, and what aspect you think men that did better?
So the research that I was actually talking about a recent research study. So they were looking at conferences where the financial analysts meet with the corporate executives, and they have a record of that and see after they attend the meeting, compare female and male, how do that translate into their stock recommendation, their performance in the stock recommendation. And they find that when you give a context to women, this is the time that you are supposed to do networking. Forget about your family, your child, right? Just 2 hours, focus. And they find that female can do it, and actually they can do a very well, actually better job than male. So yeah, it's just how to be in a context that is well defined, I think, for female. For male, there's a lot of just ad hoc activities, right? You just, after this, let's go to have a drink, and you get some information of that, right? So it's kind of not very structured.
So we have 2 more questions. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you women being here today. It's I've been learning a lot, and I'm just very curious if I may ask. I'm someone that really wants to enter the financial industry. If I may ask, what challenges as women have you faced that can you guys input so I could better prepare myself to enter this field? What obstacles am I looking at, and how can I better prepare myself?
Well, I would say that what would be helpful is making sure that you take advantage of all of the career opportunities here on campus, internships, when, sort of similar to the analysts, when company representatives come here to campus to talk about, just say marketing conference or, marketing presentation, go and then introduce yourself to whoever that was at the end, and just be open to talking to a lot of different people. Go to career fairs, even if there's nothing that you're really interested in. I had a friend once that got a financial analyst position in a defense industry company just because he went to a job fair where they were. They weren't looking for financial analysts, but he just struck up a conversation and ended up getting a job there. So it's just getting out there and talking to a lot of people, assuming that you've got the right education background and everything. But I think that's very important.
I would strongly recommend, and you can go to your career development services, and they'll give you probably 10 other names, but Girls Who Invest has a great summer intensive program, and you can do that online in addition to working. Rock the Street, I think, is another one where you have great online access to developing your hard skills, and that way when you do have that internship, you at least feel like you have a really strong foundation of some of the technical skills going in, so that you can be a sponge and absorb everything else from that organization. You're not worried about, can I build this Excel model, or do I know how to do X, Y, Z? So those would just be a couple other areas, but I'm sure those are just 2 programs I know of. I know there's a million others. But go to your career services here and just say, help me find a couple of these online. And now is the time. I know you probably are so busy with classes, studying, and it sounds impossible to add one more thing to your plate. But if you just, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, I think it's really important.
Thank you.
What was the name of the first one?
So Girls Who Invest is a broader program. They have an online intensive program and a summer intensive program. One's in person, where you're on campus at Wharton for several weeks and then work full time. The other's fully online.
Yeah, your thoughts about performance versus sustainability when it comes to investment management, and then what kind of opportunities are there when it comes to the intersection of finance and sustainability?
Sustainability, right? Yeah. They did well during the COVID period. So they used to be thinking that doing well versus doing good, there's a tension between that. And companies that are so-called same industry, they offer higher financial performance. But I don't think, actually, over time, that finding has been changed. With more recent data, they find that the companies can both do well and do good. With so many investors and customers demanding sustainable and responsible investing, the economic models of companies going to change. So I have a high hope of that.
So I want to thank our wonderful audience for wonderful questions, and of course our fantastic panel for sharing their personal insights, investment insights. And I want to also thank the UCI team here, who have been absolutely incredible, so professional, so giving. So thank you so much for that. And also, of course, the WISE team that put this together. It takes a village, truly, to get these things off the ground. So think the dean is going to come up with
Thank you all so much. That was really wonderful. I'm Jamie Smith. I'm the interim dean of the graduate division. And as we conclude the WISE Tearing Down the Pink Wall event, I want to take a moment to express my incredible heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists and dedicated moderators. Your insights and expertise have truly illuminated our discussions today and have really provided some very valuable insights and perspectives that inspire us and really challenge us to think differently about the paths ahead. You know, I was talking earlier to a woman, Nada, who runs the Sage Scholars Program, and she was talking, which is a program aimed at helping students that come from very serious financial difficulties kind of forge new pathways ahead. And we're talking about the importance of learning the investments to change the narrative, right, of that kind of generational wealth. And I'm in the arts, and so I did never learn to invest at all, no business whatsoever. And I think that this is so crucial. So we really appreciate all of your valuable advice and insights. We have some special gifts for you here, and I have special elves that are going to come give those to you. As they're passing those out, I also want to extend a really special thank you to our sponsors, Pacific Life for sponsoring the panel, and Simplify for generously sponsoring the networking reception. We're about to go outside too. Your support has really been instrumental in making this event possible and in fostering meaningful connections among all the attendees. To our audience, who are students, scholars, industry leaders, and community partners, thank you for being an integral part of this conversation. Your engagement and enthusiasm made this event not just a presentation, but a dynamic exchange of ideas and experiences. And the collaboration between industry and community partners is really vital for creating opportunities for our future leaders. It's essential, actually. I would now like to introduce Paisley Nardini from Simplify to share a few words and invite us to the networking reception.
If anything's going to pull us away from a World Series baseball game tonight, I am glad it was this event. By way of quick background, Paisley Nardini, I'll introduce Simplify here in a moment, but I'm also the president of the CFA Society in Orange County, and the reason I mention that is given some of the questions. I work with 6 local universities across Orange County, undergrad and graduate students that are looking to find ways to enter the industry. And so if nothing else, please connect with me either tonight or on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions, career advice, getting you guys connected for job opportunities, education opportunities. But the reason I'm up here tonight is to introduce Simplify. In short, I would say we launched 4 years ago. We're a registered investment advisor, and we're putting alternatives within ETF vehicles. So we're democratizing the use of alternatives for the advisor community as well as the institutional community. We talked a bit about hedge funds earlier this evening. And so the ability to offer institutional caliber investment strategies to the market is something that we're really focused on. And I wouldn't typically talk about a strategy, but given the topic tonight, we actually have an ETF. The ticker is PINK, pink. And the reason I mention this, of course, is tearing down the pink wall. But the other reason is it's a healthcare strategy, and all of the net proceeds go to the Susan G. Komen Foundation, which, of course, October being breast cancer awareness is really special. So just wanted to mention that. And my colleague Jeff Stern is here with me tonight as well. So happy to answer any questions outside, but thank you guys for the time, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight.